Hello, this is John Crossman, and I have Ryan Singer with us, and this is our inaugural podcast of the big, the small, and the weird, where we look at unlisted private companies, so private securities, and really talk about what's interesting about them to give everyone a better idea of where we should go. So Ryan, what do we have for today? What are our three victims for today?
So I've been searching the internet for recent funding announcements, and the three that stuck out to me this time were Kalshi, Config, and Panthalassa. Let's talk about Kalshi first. They're the big one.
When you love your betting sites, you love your gambling sites. So let's talk about this one. I think you should probably start off.
Sure. So it's an interesting thing, and it kind of gets straight to the heart of of what's in the news about Kalshi these days. I don't think of prediction markets as primarily betting or gambling, because I think that people are coming with actual, like, they have a view, they think something's going to happen, they think the market's underpricing it. So it's not the same as, you're betting on the roulette wheel or the craps table, where the odds are known to everybody and you're just trying to be in the action. With prediction markets, I think that everybody at least thinks they have an insightful take, if not actual insider information. And so they think that when they're betting, they think the market is actually mispriced. Which, it's interesting when you talk about prediction markets, how they got famous, which is predicting the outcomes of presidential elections. But one of the things that's really interesting about Kalshi is they're being sued by every single gambling regulator because gambling on sports outcomes is 90% of what's happening here. And insider trading on sports outcomes is only really possible if someone's intentionally throwing the game, and that is illegal.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you say that. I agree with you. And what fascinates me about the website is it really answers Wanamaker's old dictum of sort of, I know half of all advertising is wasted. I just wish someone would tell me which half. And I think what these prediction markets actually do is help people price what's going on. I think it actually will. I understand people are using it for gambling on sports because that's what's popular. But I think it's going to be used more and more in the political field. I think it's going to be used more and more for business decisions where people see what is the market telling me, because that's what we use pricing for. So I think it's kind of a cool thing that they, unlike poly markets, they use the CFTC, sort of regulatory hack to try and avoid all the things that are happening anyway, which is every state, prosecuting and suing them. What do you think the chances are? Do you think they'll get through, or do you think the CFTC is powerful enough, or a good enough brand name to get them through the legal hurdles?
Well, so it's an interesting thing, right? So prediction markets, otherwise known as event futures, have been under the CFTC sway since they were invented and popularized in the 80s. But the CFTC has historically been extremely reluctant to license them and allow them because of the perception that they're gambling and the perception that they don't have kind of a use other than gambling. And so they've only in the past, before recently, licensed extremely small, extremely limited ones, usually focused just on politics, sometimes on weather, right? And that changed with the extraordinary success of Polymarket in predicting Trump's surprise win in the first presidential election that he was in. And after that, the Trump administration came in and said, actually, we would like prediction markets to be broadly legal in the U.S., and we would like the CFTC to be permissive and to focus on consumer protection related to funds and custody, not related to what we allow people to speculate on. Let them speculate very, very broadly. Don't try to be the morality police. Don't try to stop people from gambling. Don't try to control contract structure. Just keep these execution venues from losing people's money, right? Keep the custody and the settlement well capitalized and fair, and focus only on that. And then Biden tried to reverse that and raided Polymarket. And then Kalshi had to sue to get a license. And then Trump too came in and actually started aggressively formalizing these rules. So now what we're getting is the CFTC really is gearing up to come and try to defend Kalshi and say, listen, we can license people to run speculation markets on any kind of event, sports included. And if the states don't like it, then that's what federal preemption is for.
Excellent. So you would say, to sort of sum it up, that the bet on this one is whether they can sort of thread that regulatory issue, which really seems to come down to a political philosophy issue of whether we're growing up and realizing that there is a value to prediction markets, there is a value to putting price on outcomes, or whether we're going to become, again, the morality police and decide that these things really shouldn't happen because they're very bad for you and you're a very bad person.
Yeah, I think that there are these two issues that people conflate. One is there something useful about events futures about the news, right? About political outcomes, weather, things like that, right? Even corporate outcomes, like is a merger going to happen? Is a merger going to get approved? Is an IPO going to happen? Right? So there's that stuff. And I think that it's pretty clear that economists, the business world, and the more libertarian policy people all agree that there's major value there. And then separately from that, there's the other question of do we want to police gambling when we don't see that value, and do we want to try to figure out what are the valuable markets and what are the gambling markets, if there's even a difference, and to what degree do we want a morality police, and do the states and the feds have a different idea, and the Republicans and Democrats have a different idea. So obviously the libertarian direction is these are the same question, and either we allow speculating outcomes because we want to better predict outcomes and we want to better hedge outcomes, or we don't like gambling and we try to restrict it, right? But in a more pluralistic world, there might be a line to draw somewhere where we say some of these outcomes are meaningful and thus speculating about them provides useful data. And some of these outcomes are just for entertainment purposes and maybe better regulated as gambling.
Yep. Well, as last valuation, it was 2.5 billion. They're pulling in some serious money now, so this is a money maker. They obviously can't list at any time soon until all their legal challenges are adjudicated. So it's a legitimately a very interesting large company, and we're going to continue to follow it. So should we move on to our small company now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next up, Config. So Config, I call it a small company because they just raised what they're calling their seed round. But mine, like 2012 instincts, actually call this a medium-sized company. They just raised a $35 million round at a $200 million or so valuation. And basically what they're trying to do, they're a Korean startup. They've hired 300 people to do physical tasks while wearing motion capture rigs and while being on camera. And they're trying to collect motion data to use in building reinforcement learning environments to train robots to do those kinds of motions.
And I noticed that they talk a lot about how they're trying to adopt the TSMC model to sort of be a repository or a library for the whole industry rather than trying to capture all of this for their own purposes.
Yeah, I think their goal is they don't really want to like own all of the robots. What they want to do is they want to make it cheaper and faster and better to build good robots. And so they want everybody who builds robots to work with them and both add to and utilize their libraries of training data. So just like TSMC ends up getting a lot of their revenue, not just from the manufacturing of chips, but also from the library of ways to build ASICs and FPGAs, and licensing from that library. I think these guys also, they really want to have a library of useful ways for robots to move in the world and to build that up and to get licensing from that, and to encourage there to be more robots doing a higher diversity of high value tasks.
Well, it sounds interesting. The one thing about TSMC is the library supports the multi-billion-dollar fabs which support the library. So it sort of goes around in a circular motion. I'm not sure if I see the circular motion here, except for the fact that it is supported by some of the major players in the robotics field, like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SKT, all these guys. They're all invested, and it may become sort of the industry standard. That's probably the only thing they've got going for them, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, I think that they don't have the fab, but every single one of their strategic investors has their own factories, and so I think their idea is, if the strategic investors are all piling in and using this as their new standard and sharing data with each other, they can jumpstart the library even without the fab. So it's kind of the opposite of TSMC, where the library formed because of TSMC's smaller customers, not because of the larger ones.
Right.
This is the opposite. This is the library should come together because of the larger strategic investors who are also customers, and then that library benefits the smaller customers.
So this is, in a way, this is very antithetical to the way Elon Musk is running his companies. He's trying to, it would appear, keep it all in-house, where he's got control of the whole thing. And
Elon, from what I've seen, uses kind of open sourcing or opening libraries as a rarely used strategic weapon, right? Like when he open sourced the charger infrastructure for the Tesla, so that he could make sure that every Tesla could charge at every charger, and he just destroyed all the other standards overnight by saying, I have a better standard and I'm giving it away for free. But other than those very narrow, very strategic things, you don't see a lot of like open model stuff coming out of Tesla or SpaceX or OpenAI. It's all very, very proprietary, very locked down. These guys, I wouldn't call it open source, because they're obviously their main source of revenue is licensing fees, but definitely open access seems to be their default. And they're
and I think if they protect that, not only that, protect the IP, I think is a key thing. I mean, I think the Koreans understand that very well, culturally. So I think that's actually, along with the Taiwanese. I think if this were, if this were a Shanghai-based operation, it probably wouldn't have much hope.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about this company is it's very young. It's only 16 months old, and it's already got over 100,000 hours in its library. And its co-founders are like a who's who of major AI from kind of the Google side. So it's really...
Well, maybe their first project is to keep Waymo cars from steering into washed out roads in Austin and Houston.
Well, as a frequent rider in Waymo cars, I very much hope they can improve the experience.
No, I think that's the one value prospect that these guys offer, is there's a lot of complication, a lot of looking around the corners, and it's very similar to actually the early days of TSMC, when people could write certain bits of the chip, but they had, they just wanted the best memory thing, the best L2 cache, the best this and that, and they were able to license that, use their expertise, and then bring in the other expertise from overseas. I think it's got a shot. I think it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, so my big question with training companies always is, at what point do they decide that they don't want to just do training, they want to do their own models? Because all of the expertise necessary for doing reinforcement learning and building the training environments is the same as the expertise necessary to kind of take broad generalized LLMs and specialize them in particular tasks and capabilities. So one thing I'll be watching these guys for is, at some point, will they change from being a training library to being a robotics manufacturer themselves?
Right. Which is exactly the fight that OpenAI is having with Elon Musk in the courts right now.
That's right, and
in a strange sort of way.
Absolutely, like you see this all the time, where places start with helping other AI labs, and then they want to become their own AI lab.
Okay. Well, let's go for the weird one now. And actually, this one, this is Panthalassa. And having lived in Australia and dealt with a couple of these guys, I actually have a lot of ideas about this one. But why don't you go ahead and introduce it, and I'll bring up my weird experiences in the small cap world of the ASX in a minute.
All right. So Panthalassa is a Series B funded company. It's raised a total of $210 million that we can find, worth about $1 billion post money. They just announced their Series B, which was led by Peter Thiel. It's a $140 million round. What they do is they build an 85 meter tall floating data center that they deploy in the ocean. And it uses the motion of the tides to generate enough power to run its own computers, to communicate with Starlink, to do work. And so the main focus is large model training, which relates to the company we were talking before. But the idea is basically and large model inference. But the idea is basically there's this data center floating that's not moving. It's not tethered to anything. It's not connected to any boats or shore. And it receives queries from Starlink, it processes them, and it sends the tokens right back up to the satellites. And it's just a weird way to have more data center capacity while getting away from NIMBY stuff, because they can place them in international waters.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. The guys I talked to years ago, and the Australians have done the most work because they're a large continent surrounded by water. So the CSIRO, which is, a government DARPA-like organization there, has sponsored companies like Carnegie Wave, and what they do is basically have these things, but they're hinged to the seafloor. And the motion actually drives flywheels and stuff like that, which these guys say they're not going to do. They say they're running it through tubes. And so the flywheel one does work. The tube one, it's unclear whether it works. But I see what they're trying to do. They're trying to solve the very negative ideas around having data centers. I think Maine has already voted that they don't want to have data centers. Several other states are talking about not having data centers. And so it's really all about electricity and cooling, I imagine, for these guys. Well, but the one thing they do have to overcome is the latency.
Huh? So what they say they've solved is electricity and cooling, right? So they describe their data center as a giant lollipop made of solid steel. So there's a buoyant spherical head that sits on the surface of the ocean, and then there's a 70-meter submerged vertical tube. And as the waves go through, they push seawater up and down the tube, which can be used to generate power, right? So there are no hinges, no flaps, no gearboxes. They're just spinning internal turbines, and then they use the seawater also for cooling, so they get free cooling. So this is what they say, right? And if it works, then it solves the biggest problem with data centers, which is just building them in a place where you can get abundant power, right? But there's a lot that can go wrong, right? There's the salt corrosion. There's biofouling, right? Seawater is not clean salt water. It has all sorts of bacteria and algae and stuff like that in it. We don't know whether or not waves are cost competitive with solar or wind. No one's ever done it in a way that's cost competitive. And who knows how long until the pilot really convinces everybody. I know you brought up latency, but for inference, I think delay isn't that big of a deal, right? Like there's already quite a bit of human perceptible delay when you're using ChatGPT or Claude, and this would be powering applications like that.
Okay, so you think that'll be covered? Yeah, I'm very interested in what they do with it. I agree with you. I'm not sure that anyone's proven, even in Australia, that wave generation is cost effective. And I think part of it is just, like you say, beating up the equipment. I mean, there's going to be mollusks and all sorts of things, barnacles in the tube. and literally barnacles. And you know, I think the maintenance isn't that hard. You could run a boat out there every once in a while and check up on what's going on. But I think, you know, the sea is a rough place, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure if the cost benefit actually works.
Yeah, I think we're just going to have to see with data centers, the question always is the energy economics. I think we'll have to see what the energy economics is on this, and also whether it can handle the larger maintenance. But it's a well capitalized project. Got John Doerr, Mark Benioff, Max Levchin, Dylan Field, and a bunch of venture capitalists involved. So it seems like the PayPal Mafia is really backing it hard. If it works, now we have self-sovereign data centers. That's been a dream for a very long time, all the way going back to Sealand.
That's true. Okay, well, I think we've got our 3 companies, our big one, our small one, and our weird one. And so I just want to go through a little bit of a disclaimer. The Big, Small, and Weird podcast is an educational podcast sponsored by Vex Capital, which is an SEC-registered exempt reporting advisor. Vex Securities, a related company, is a member of SIPC and FINRA. None of the content here should be construed as research, and nothing in this podcast should be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell securities. If you want more information, please go to vex.capital, and you can see some of the work that we're doing to try and bring these companies to light. And thank you very much for listening.